Hi, I'm Mannat, and today I'm going to be talking about how legislation can be used to control females' bodies and also isolate certain racial groups. Now, you might be wondering, why do I have an interest in this kind of topic? Well, I'm a law student, and although that is possibly the most boring degree in the entire world, being a law student has allowed me to think about how the law shapes our lives, and ultimately how it changes the way that we think. So, why is the law so important? But firstly, what does it even mean to say that something is a law? Now, our lives are governed by thousands of rules. There are social interaction rules. You eat in a certain way, perhaps without your hands at dinner, or you talk to somebody and smile at them to let them know that you like them. You may not think of these as rules, but if you weren't to do them, people wouldn't like you. So what differentiates a law, which a lot of people think of as a rule, from these everyday social norms? Well, one thing that differentiates the law from everything else in our lives is the fact that a law claims supremacy over all other rules. So whilst you might want to park in a certain parking spot, or it might be most convenient for you, you might be pregnant and running to the hospital, you might be speeding in your car, but somehow the law's rules that you don't speed or that you don't park in certain places matters more than all other laws and rules that govern our lives. That's what makes the law really important, because it claims supremacy and authority over all your other beliefs, whether they be religious or moral. That being said, is the law governed by what we believe? Is the law moral in that sense? Or does the law shape our morals? Now, this is a very complex question. In reality, the law is a bit of both. Often, strong social taboos against incest, for example, are reflected in our laws. The law here seeks to mirror what the moral authority and the times reflect. That being said, often laws also shape the way that we think of certain things. Drug stigmatization is a great example of this. In the United States, certain places around the country have started to decriminalize the use and distribution of certain drugs such as marijuana. In Seattle, a city which does have this decriminalized use of drugs, the law reflects a change in morality. And in some ways, this change of morality is aided by the change in the law. So today I want to talk to you about two laws that shape our social attitudes, but also perhaps reflect deep problematic thinking. The first of these relates to sentencing of crack cocaine. Now, in the United States, crack cocaine and cocaine are treated differently. Now, you might be asking, what is the difference between crack cocaine and cocaine? Well, in reality, there isn't any. Crack cocaine is merely the powdered version of the pill. Now, in the US, drugs have often been used to throw large swathes of people into prison for extended periods of time. These are felony charges, with more than two instances of possession leading to life sentences in prison and destroying the lives of individuals who often have medical issues with addiction. That being said, however, we might expect that both crack cocaine and cocaine receive the same sentencing under federal law. This would be incorrect. If you are found possessing crack cocaine, the sentence for you is 80 times higher than if you just possess cocaine. And then you might be wondering, well, why? That doesn't make any sense. Under the Obama administration, this 80-to-1 ratio was reduced to 8-to-1, but you still might be asking, why the ratio at all? Well, the reality of it is that crack cocaine is used by predominantly Black Americans in poorer societies. It is slightly cheaper to produce, significantly more available, and used by a certain racial demographic. A high-level administrator in the Reagan administration came out to say that whilst they started off with Jim Crow and segregation laws, they started discussing things like economics, taxes, housing cuts, and the war on drugs as a way to throw a largely discriminated group in prison. In the early 1900s, this attack was used on the Chinese in the form of opium laws. And later on, it was used for Black Americans to throw a significant proportion of them in jail for small and minor sentences. And a great example of this is crack cocaine. It has been used to throw so many Black Americans into prison for no apparent reason, other than the fact that these laws were passed knowing that a certain racial demographic used those drugs at a significantly higher proportion. And it all fits into this image of Black criminality. We've taken their identity, their men and their women, and actually argued that there's something more inherently dangerous and inherently criminal about the way that they behave. And our laws have been shaped to reflect that, to actually mirror the reality that we wouldn't otherwise see. Another really interesting law that perhaps reflects this subtle and more insidious form of legislation, where although we might think we are legislating on one thing, the effects of that legislation significantly harm only one minority group, is those laws relating to abortion. Now you might ask yourself, what is a right? In Roe and Wade in the United States, this particular case, this landmark case, gave women the right to access an abortion. Now, a right is something that each individual should be able to obtain. That being said, a right doesn't mean anything if it's not accessible. I might have the right to a family or the right to my religious freedom, but in an autocratic state where my thoughts and ideas are severely limited, this right may become meaningless if it isn't accessible to me. And a great example of this are abortion laws in the United States, where clinics have been shut down and where women have to travel hundreds of kilometers to be able to access a right that was apparently granted to them in the 70s. One of the more terrifying laws that is currently being passed through the Ohio State Legislature is that of the fetal abortion heartbeat. And this particular law states that a woman should not be able to abort her fetus if it has a heartbeat. And I use the word heartbeat here because at 6 weeks, the apparent time frame where a fetus gains a heartbeat, it is still just a tiny microcosm of cells connected integrally to the woman's body. It's not a living, breathing organism. But even more importantly is that at 6 weeks, so few women have actually realized that they're pregnant. The absolute first signs of pregnancy occur after 4 weeks, giving women approximately a 10-day window to access an abortion if they would like to. This makes the right to an abortion almost obsolete. It might as well not exist. But the reality of it is that this legislation is directed towards helping mothers and ultimately allowing them to understand the science behind abortion and pregnancy. Another great rule along a similar vein is that of ultrasounds. In many states, women, in order to have an abortion, must first go to a doctor and have an ultrasound, because it is argued that that will allow them to fully understand the effect of what they're doing. In reality, what many of these states are trying to do is elicit an emotional response from a very vulnerable woman by sending her to a clinic and forcing her to look at the image of a growing being inside of her in an attempt to emotionally guilt her into making a decision that may ruin her life. Often, these laws, which are aimed at women's health or improving the scientific understanding of an abortion, in reality are used to bully and emotionally manipulate young women who are often far too scared and far too vulnerable to be receiving this kind of pressure. So it's really important that we examine our legislation not merely for its immediate effects or for what it's sold to us. In reality, legislation reflects numerous moral codes, but also often an agenda. And it's therefore important that we examine the full consequences of these outcomes. Therefore, when we look at legislation, we need to look at what beyond the immediate effects of that legislation and actually have a look at what groups are going to be affected and how they're going to be affected in the long term. Thank you.